My name is Ryan Collins. I'm 51 years old, and for nearly 30 years, I worked as a financial controller for a company in Oregon. I had what many people would call a successful life, a stable career, a comfortable home, and a family that seemed to have it all. My wife, Abby, was everything I could have ever asked for. She was confident, beautiful, and effortlessly charismatic. Together, we had built something that seemed unshakable. We raised a daughter, created a warm, inviting home, and even bought a lakeside plot where we planned to build our dream retirement house. We had everything we needed, or so I thought. But on one evening, everything changed. Started off like any other evening. Abby had been at a corporate dinner, one of those networking events that I never paid much attention to. She would attend them regularly, usually coming home late. We'd laugh about the over-the-top conversations she'd have with clients, the wine that flowed too freely, and the awkward small talk that was just part of the job. When Abby came home that night, everything seemed normal at first. I had been home with our daughter, watching TV and trying to unwind after a long week. It was only after Abby took off her jacket and left it hanging on the back of a chair that I noticed something strange. A gold chain with a heart-shaped pendant fell out of her pocket, landing softly on the table. It wasn't mine. I didn't recognize it. At first, I thought I must be mistaken. Maybe it was just a trinket she had forgotten about. But there was something about the way it gleamed in the light, something too deliberate about it. I didn't say anything at first, unsure of whether I was just overthinking it. After all, Abby was always buying little things for herself, souvenirs from business trips or spontaneous finds. But this felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't meant for me. Finally, I asked her about it. "Where did this come from?" I said, holding the pendant up. Her reaction was immediate, too immediate. She barely hesitated before saying, "Oh, it's just an old thing. A childhood trinket I found in a box I've been going through. I must have forgotten about it." It was a reasonable explanation, one that made sense in the moment. But something in the way she said it felt too quick. It was almost as if she were trying to convince me, more than herself. I wanted to believe her. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just being paranoid. But then she changed the subject so abruptly, almost as if she were trying to steer me away from the uncomfortable moment. "You're probably just tired, Ryan. You're looking for reasons to argue." She gave me a tight smile, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I nodded, trying to convince myself that I was reading too much into it. But there was a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. The unease was already starting to grow, but I couldn't quite place it. I didn't want to confront her again, so I let it go. The night continued, and I didn't think much more of it. Until later, when Abby and I attended a dinner with some of my colleagues. I had invited her to join me since it was one of those rare occasions where I had a free evening. We sat across from each other, and the conversation flowed as expected, nothing unusual. But then Abby raised her glass, and with a slight chuckle, she made a toast. "To the patience of those who live with men who don't know how to be supportive," she said, her tone light but cutting. I froze. I thought she was joking at first, but no one laughed. The room went quiet, and I felt my face flush. I glanced around the table, unsure of what to say, but I didn't have time to react. My hands went numb under the table, and I couldn't bring myself to even touch my wine glass. I was frozen in place, unsure of how to handle what was happening. The words felt like a punch to the gut. Abby had made this public remark in front of my colleagues, people I respected and who respected me. I could feel their eyes on me, and it was almost as if I was being humiliated without anyone saying a word. I tried to play it off, pretending it didn't bother me. "I'm sure she's just joking," I muttered. But the damage had already been done. The air in the room felt heavier, as if everyone suddenly knew something that I didn't. The evening dragged on, and my mind kept circling back to that moment. Abby didn't seem to notice my discomfort, or at least she didn't acknowledge it. She was talking to other people, laughing and drinking, and I found myself sitting in silence, thinking about what she'd said. My heart was racing, and I was unsure of whether the unease was in my head or if there was something more going on. I couldn't understand it. Abby had always been supportive, always the life of the party. She was the one who held everything together when times were tough. But now something felt off. I couldn't ignore it anymore. That comment, that toast, felt like a warning sign. It was as though she was telling everyone that I wasn't enough, that I was the one who didn't understand her, who didn't support her in the way she needed. That night I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Abby seemed oblivious, sleeping peacefully beside me, but I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't stop replaying the events in my head. The pendant, the toast, her dismissive comment, and the strange way she'd been acting lately, more distant, more distracted. The next few days were filled with that same lingering sense of doubt. Nothing specific happened, but I started noticing little things. The way Abby would glance at her phone and quickly silence it when I entered the room. The way she seemed to be going out more frequently, spending more time on her own. The laughter that once filled our home seemed quieter, more reserved. I didn't want to believe that something was wrong, but the signs were becoming impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the pendant or the toast. It was the growing distance between us, the little cracks that had started to show in our perfect life. I didn't know what was happening, but I had a sinking feeling that things weren't as they seemed. And deep down, I was afraid of what the truth might be. The unease didn't go away. It crept in and out of my thoughts like a slow burn. What once seemed trivial, small moments, fleeting doubts, began to form a clear and undeniable picture. It wasn't just the pendant or the toast, it was the subtle shifts in Abby's behavior, the things I had ignored or written off as nothing. Now, they all felt like warning signs, like pieces of a puzzle I had never wanted to solve. The first thing I noticed was the change in her routine. Abby had never been the fitness type, but a few months ago she joined a gym. It was an odd decision for her. She'd always been the first to scoff at the idea of exercise, preferring to spend her time on more cerebral activities like reading, cooking, or organizing. Yet one day she came home with a brand new sports outfit, her face flushed with excitement. "I joined a fitness club," she said, as if it was no big deal. But I could tell she was trying to sell it to me, trying to convince me it was something she had always wanted to do. I nodded and smiled, but something about it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't like Abby to make a decision so out of character without discussing it first. And she didn't seem to have a real reason behind it, no enthusiasm that matched the change. It felt forced, like she was trying to convince herself. She started going more frequently, sometimes even leaving early in the morning or coming back late at night. I was used to her being busy, but this new routine felt different. I didn't think much of it at first, thinking it was just a phase, something she would eventually get tired of. But as the days went on, I noticed how protective she became of her phone. She started keeping it on silent, always face down, even when she was home. Before, Abby had never cared about privacy. We were an open book to each other. But now she carried it around with her, even taking it with her into the bathroom, something I'd never seen her do before. I tried to let it slide, to chalk it up to a new hobby, a new interest. But I couldn't help the gnawing feeling in the back of my mind. It was the little things, the phone, the gym, her secretive air. Abby was changing, but I didn't know how or why. Then came the weekends. Abby, who used to spend her Saturdays helping me with errands or catching up on household tasks, started disappearing for hours at a time. She told me she was going to volunteer meetings, though I had no idea what she was talking about. I asked her about it once, and she quickly assured me it was just some charity work, something she'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. "Don't worry, Ryan. You know I'll always make time for you and our daughter," she said, her smile tight, a little too rehearsed. But something felt off. I had been married to Abby long enough to know when something wasn't quite right. These sudden volunteer meetings started taking up more of her time. Saturdays turned into full days, and I would find myself at home, alone, wondering what she was really doing. She would disappear in the morning and return in the late afternoon or even evening, as though she had no concept of time. I didn't press her for details, but each time she returned, there was a faint shift in her demeanor. She seemed a little too energized, a little too distant, as though her mind was somewhere else entirely. The most unsettling thing came when Abby started staying out overnight. One Saturday, she told me she had to attend an emergency meeting for the art festival she'd been involved in, a festival I had never been invited to. It didn't make sense. An emergency at a festival that she didn't even seem particularly passionate about? It felt like another excuse, another story that didn't add up. I didn't confront her. I didn't want to seem paranoid or controlling. But as the days passed, the puzzle pieces started falling into place, and the image they formed was one I didn't want to believe. That evening, when she came home from the art festival emergency, she was quieter than usual. She didn't seem tired or stressed, as I would expect from someone who had spent an entire night away from home. Instead, she looked almost pleased with herself, like she had just come back from a secret vacation. She told me the event had been a success, but she didn't offer any details. I didn't ask. I should have, but I was starting to feel like I was losing her in ways that didn't make sense. I began to retreat into myself, distancing myself from Abby as she had from me. I wasn't angry, I wasn't even sure what I was feeling anymore. I had stopped questioning her stories, stopped asking too many questions. It was easier to just ignore it, to let her live her life while I tried to fill the silence with work, with small talk, with anything that would distract me from the growing realization that something was very wrong. And then, one night, things finally came to a head. I was home alone, catching up on some paperwork. I glanced at the clock and realized Abby had been gone for hours. I texted her to check in, but the message went unanswered. That wasn't unusual, she was busy, and I didn't expect her to reply immediately. But as the evening dragged on, I began to feel uneasy. I checked the time again. 10:30 p.m. She was supposed to be home by now. I tried calling her. It went straight to voicemail. By midnight, I was pacing. I felt a knot form in my stomach, a mix of worry and something else, something darker. My instincts were screaming at me. Something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Finally, just after 1 a.m., Abby came home. She walked in the door, her face flushed, her hair slightly disheveled. She was wearing the same clothes as when she left, but there was something about her that was different. She seemed distant. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She gave me a quick smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Sorry, babe. We got caught up talking about the event. Tom got away from me." It wasn't the explanation I wanted, but I didn't press her. I just nodded and tried to mask my frustration. She went straight to bed without another word, leaving me alone in the silence of the house. I lay awake that night, wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling. Abby's strange behavior wasn't just a passing phase. It wasn't about fitness or charity work or late nights out with friends. It was about something bigger, something she wasn't telling me. And as the hours passed, the sinking feeling in my gut deepened. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't me overthinking things. This was real. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I was beginning to suspect that Abby wasn't the woman I thought she was. The days after Abby's late return were filled with a strange sort of tension. I went about my routine, but every small detail seemed to hold more weight. Every time she picked up her phone or glanced away when I spoke, my mind raced. I couldn't help but wonder where she had been or who she had been with. The nagging doubts that had been building inside me for weeks finally reached a breaking point. I was beginning to feel like I couldn't trust her, and worse, I didn't know how to ask the right questions anymore. Abby didn't seem to notice my growing unease. She continued with her routines, the gym, the late nights, the emergency meetings that never seemed to end. But it wasn't just the changes in her behavior anymore. It was everything: her distance, her reluctance to share even the smallest details, her guarded responses when I asked anything about her day. It was as if she were building a wall between us, brick by brick, and I was too afraid to tear it down. One Friday afternoon, I came home early from work. I had expected Abby to be at the gym or out with friends, but when I pulled into the driveway, I saw her car parked in the garage. It was strange. Abby was rarely home during the day, and I had no idea where she was. I tried calling her, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I assumed she must be in the shower or busy with something. But as I entered the house, something felt off. The usual noise of the TV or music was absent, and the house was eerily quiet. I walked through the living room, calling her name softly, but there was no response. I made my way upstairs, and as I approached our bedroom, I heard voices. At first, I thought it might be the TV, but then I heard Abby's laugh, low and in asterisk mate. And another voice, a man's voice, laughing in return. I froze in place, heart pounding in my chest. The laughter was familiar. I didn't recognize the man, but I knew enough to recognize the tone, the way they spoke to each other, the familiarity in their voices. It wasn't a casual conversation, it wasn't business. There was something deeper in their interaction, something that made my stomach drop to the floor. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to barge into the room and demand answers, but I stood there, frozen, unsure of whether I was ready for the truth. I didn't want to hear what I was about to hear. But I couldn't turn away either. I needed to know. I stood still for a moment, just listening, straining to catch the words through the thin walls of the walk-in closet. Abby's voice was soft, teasing as she spoke to the man. "You know, it's funny," she said with a laugh. "Your skin still smells like yesterday morning." I didn't hear the man's response, but I heard the way Abby laughed again. It was a laugh I hadn't heard in months, light, carefree, almost as if she were enjoying herself in a way she hadn't around me in ages. The kind of laugh that people share when they're caught in a moment of closeness, something more than a casual exchange. My legs felt weak. I didn't know how long I stood there, holding my breath until I slowly backed away. I didn't want to hear any more. The pieces I had been ignoring, the signs I had been brushing aside, were suddenly all too clear. Abby was having an affair. There was no other explanation. The necklace, the late nights, the secret of phone calls, and now this. It wasn't a misunderstanding. This was the reality I had been avoiding. I didn't confront her then. I couldn't. Not yet. I needed space to breathe, to process what I had just heard. I walked away quietly, leaving the house without saying a word. I drove aimlessly for a while, my mind spinning in a million different directions. The anger, the hurt, the disbelief, they were all there, fighting for attention. But there was also a strange sense of relief. The truth was finally out there, even if I wasn't ready to face it. I drove until I ended up at a park, one I hadn't visited in years. I sat there in my car, staring out at the empty benches, feeling like the world had shifted under my feet. For the first time in months, I realized that Abby wasn't the woman I thought she was. She wasn't the woman I had built my life with. I had been living with a stranger, and I didn't know how to reconcile the person I thought she was with the person she had become. I couldn't just go back to the house and pretend everything was fine. I needed time to think. I needed time to figure out what I was going to do next. But as the night wore on, I realized that I couldn't run forever. I had a daughter who needed me, a life that was waiting for me to make a decision. I couldn't let Abby's betrayal destroy me. And I couldn't let her continue to lie to my face. The truth was there, and I needed to confront it. The next morning, I returned home, my head clearer than it had been in a long time. Abby was in the kitchen, fixing breakfast as if nothing had happened. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, wondering how she could act so normal. She didn't know I had heard everything. She didn't know I knew. I cleared my throat, and she looked up, startled for a moment. She smiled, but I could see the hesitation in her eyes. "Hey," she said, setting down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables. "I didn't hear you coming last night." I nodded, my mind racing. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. I didn't want to accuse her, not yet. I wasn't sure how I would handle this. "Out," she replied, brushing it off with a vague answer. "Just, out." I stared at her for a long moment, watching the way she avoided my eyes. Her smile was still in place, but I could see the cracks starting to form. She knew I was starting to put things together. "I think we need to talk," I said softly. Her face froze, and I could see the panic flash in her eyes. "What about?" "You know exactly what about," I replied, my voice low but firm. For the first time in a long while, Abby looked unsure of herself. She didn't know what to say, and the silence stretched between us. I knew this wasn't going to be easy. But I wasn't going to back down anymore. I wasn't going to let her continue to deceive me. Abby swallowed hard, the tension in her shoulders rising. "Ryan, I don't know what you think you know, but it's not what you think." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I held back. I had already heard enough. Now it was time for her to admit the truth. "Then tell me," I said. "Tell me what's going on." Abby hesitated. I could see the guilt in her eyes, the weight of her secrets pressing down on her. For the first time in our marriage, she didn't have an answer ready. "I'm sorry," she whispered, barely audible. "I didn't want to hurt you." The words were hollow. The damage had already been done. There was no going back from this. Abby had already crossed a line, and now it was time for me to decide what to do with the truth. I stood there, staring at Abby as her words fell flat between us. I wanted to yell at her, to demand more details, to get every last ounce of the truth. But I didn't. Instead, a strange calmness washed over me, a feeling I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just numb. The truth had already started to settle in my chest, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down. She stared at me, waiting for a response, but I didn't give her one. I didn't know what to say. What could I say? This wasn't a situation I had ever prepared myself for. This wasn't something I could just talk my way out of. Abby had betrayed me, and there was no coming back from it. I could see it in her eyes, the guilt, the regret, but none of that mattered now. It was too late for apologies. "I think I need some time," I said quietly, my voice breaking the silence. It was the first thing that came to mind. I wasn't sure what I meant by it, whether I needed time to think, or time to get away from her, or maybe time to just let everything sink in. But it felt like the right thing to say. Abby nodded, her face pale. She opened her mouth as if to say something more, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just stood there, her eyes searching mine, pleading for some kind of understanding, some kind of forgiveness. But I couldn't give her that. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. "I'm going to pack a bag," I said, turning toward the stairs. I needed space. I needed to leave. I couldn't stay in the house with her anymore. Not after hearing everything, not after seeing her in that moment of guilt. I needed to get away, even if just for a little while. I had to be alone. I didn't look back as I walked up the stairs, but I could feel her eyes on me. I could feel the weight of her presence even though I was already halfway up the stairs. I wasn't angry, but I was shaken. This wasn't the life I had built. This wasn't the marriage I thought I had. And yet, there I was, packing a bag as if everything had been reduced to nothing. When I came downstairs, Abby was still standing there, her hands trembling at her sides. She didn't say anything, and I didn't either. I just grabbed my keys and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she finally asked, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I said, my voice distant even to myself. I need to be alone." I opened the door and stepped outside, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to leave. I got in my car and drove without a destination in mind. The familiar streets of our neighborhood felt like a foreign landscape, and every turn, every streetlight, felt like another reminder of the life I had just left behind. My heart was heavy with the weight of it all, and my mind raced, unable to process what had happened. I didn't think about Abby anymore. I didn't think about our daughter or the house or the life we had built. All I could think about was how I needed to get away. I needed to disappear, if only for a little while. The truth had shattered everything, and I had no idea how to piece it all back together. I ended up at a small motel in a town on the outskirts of Austin. It was the kind of place that people passed by without a second thought, a quiet, unassuming place where no one knew my name. I rented a room, grabbed a few necessities, and settled in. The silence was deafening, but it was the kind of silence I needed. No calls. No texts. No emails. No family. I didn't check social media, didn't open the news. I didn't want to hear from anyone. I didn't want anyone's opinions or judgments. I just wanted to exist without the constant noise of the life I had left behind. For the first time in years, I didn't have a schedule. No meetings. No phone calls. No responsibilities. Just me, the quiet, and the empty room. I spent the next few days working odd jobs at a local farm and a small coffee shop. I didn't need to talk to anyone. I just needed to keep busy, to keep my mind occupied with something other than the wreckage of my marriage. I woke up early every day, worked until I was physically exhausted, and went to bed as soon as the sun set. There were no distractions, no reminders of the life I had left behind. It was easier this way. There was nothing left for me in Oregon. I couldn't go back to Abby, not yet. Not until I knew what I was supposed to do next. Each day, the weight of what had happened sank in a little more. At first, I was numb. But as time passed, the anger started to take hold. I wanted to confront Abby, to make her see the damage she had caused. But I couldn't. Not yet. I didn't want to hear her excuses. I didn't want to hear her tell me that she was sorry, that she made a mistake. Because I knew the truth now. There was no going back. But then, after 3 months, I received a letter. It was addressed to me, written in Abby's familiar handwriting. The letter was brief, but the message was clear. She knew where I was. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She wanted to explain. She said she needed to see me just once, to explain everything, to clear the air. The letter wasn't a plea for reconciliation. It wasn't an apology. It was an invitation to hear her side, to understand why she had done what she did. I wasn't sure what to think. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave the past where it belonged. But another part of me knew that I couldn't avoid this forever. I had a daughter, a family, a history with Abby that couldn't be erased. So I did what I never thought I would do. I went. The hotel she had mentioned was just outside the city, tucked away in a quiet corner of Austin. I arrived early, not sure what to expect. I was still angry. I was still hurt. But I was also curious in a way. I needed to hear her explanation, not because I wanted to forgive her, but because I needed closure. When I walked into the lobby, I saw Abby sitting at a table in the corner. She had aged in the 3 months since I'd left. There was a weariness in her eyes, something that hadn't been there before. She looked different. Not in the way I had imagined, but in the way that someone looks when they've been through something difficult, something that has broken them. She stood when she saw me, her face softening. She didn't say anything at first. She just looked at me, almost as if she were waiting for me to speak. I took a deep breath and sat down across from her. "I'm here," I said, my voice quiet. "Now, tell me what happened." Abby sat there, her eyes avoiding mine. She seemed different, older, weary, like she'd been carrying a weight I had no idea about. It wasn't the woman I had known for so many years. The woman who used to be the heart of our home, the one I had always trusted without question. This Abby, sitting across from me, was a stranger. And the silence between us, thick with years of unspoken words, was deafening. I could feel the tension in my chest, the storm of emotions battling inside me. Anger. Hurt. Confusion. But there was one feeling that lingered above all others: resignation. I knew that no matter what Abby said, nothing would undo the damage that had already been done. Nothing would fix the years of betrayal, the secrets, the lies. But I needed answers. I had to hear it from her. I needed to know what had happened, what led her to make the choices she had. I wasn't here for reconciliation. I wasn't here for forgiveness. I was here for closure. So, tell me, I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of everything I had been holding inside. What happened, Abby? What went wrong? She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped them in front of her on the table. She opened her mouth to speak, but then closed it again as if she were searching for the right words. I could see the guilt in her eyes, but I didn't want her apologies. I wasn't here for her to justify her actions. I wasn't here to make her feel better. I didn't know how to tell you, Abby finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know where to start. I didn't want to hurt you. Too late for that, I replied, cutting her off before she could finish her thought. My voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm. I wasn't here to listen to excuses. You've already hurt me, Abby. I think I deserve more than just a vague apology. She nodded, her eyes welling up with tears. I know. I've hurt you more than I can ever explain. I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. I wasn't sure if I could stomach what was coming next. But I had to know. Start from the beginning, I said. Don't leave anything out. Abby hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I could see the conflict on her face, as though she was battling with herself whether to tell me the truth or hold on to the last shred of dignity she had left. She opened her mouth and then closed it, her gaze drifting toward the window as if looking for some escape. But there was no escape now. There was only the truth, and I wasn't going to leave this room without hearing it. I didn't mean for it to happen, she finally said, her voice shaky. At first, it was just harmless. I didn't think it would turn into what it did. It was just attention. I hadn't felt it in a long time, Ryan. I couldn't stop myself from shaking my head. Attention? Is that what you're calling it? You had an affair because you needed attention. Abby's face flushed with guilt and she averted her eyes. She nodded, but there was no defense in her gesture. I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I didn't know how to fix things between us. We were drifting apart and I didn't know how to stop it. So, I started looking for it elsewhere. So you just let it happen? I asked, struggling to keep my emotions in check. You didn't think about what it would do to me? To our daughter? To our family? I didn't think about it, Abby admitted, tears now streaming down her face. I didn't think about anything but the way he made me feel. He paid attention to me. He made me feel like I mattered again, like I wasn't just a wife and a mother, but someone, you know? Someone who could still be desired. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. She was telling me in the coldest terms that she had been so consumed by her own loneliness and insecurities that she had chosen to throw away everything we had. She hadn't thought about our family, our history, or the life we had built. She had thought about herself and only herself. I sat there in stunned silence for a moment, trying to process what she had just said. Who is he? I asked quietly. The man you were seeing behind my back. Abby flinched, but she didn't look away. His name is Jason, she said, her voice breaking. I never meant for it to go as far as it did. It started off innocent, but then it didn't stop. I didn't know how to get out of it. I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I held it in check. So it wasn't just a mistake, I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. It wasn't a fleeting thing. You were emotionally invested in him. You chose him over me. I didn't choose him, Abby protested, but there was no conviction in her voice. I didn't want this. I never wanted to hurt you, Ryan. But I couldn't help myself. I needed it. I needed him. I felt the weight of her words sink in. I had heard enough. I didn't need her to justify her actions anymore. There was nothing she could say that would make it right. The damage was done, and no explanation would undo the betrayal. I don't know how to look at you anymore, I said, my voice barely audible. I wasn't angry. I was just lost. I don't know who you are. And I don't know how I'm supposed to forgive you for this. I don't expect forgiveness, Abby said, her voice raw with emotion. I don't expect you to take me back. I don't even expect you to believe me when I say I'm sorry. But I need you to know that it wasn't about love. It was about something I lost in myself. Something I was too scared to face. I thought I could fix it by finding someone else. But I was wrong. So wrong. The words didn't make me feel any better. They didn't bring me comfort. All they did was confirm what I had already suspected. Abby had chosen someone else. She had betrayed me. She had betrayed our family. I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again, I said, the truth of it weighing heavy in the air. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And I don't know if I want to. Abby's face crumpled as she sobbed, her hands shaking. I know, she whispered. I know I've ruined everything. I didn't mean to, but I did. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The silence between us was thick, suffocating. Finally, I stood up. It wasn't a dramatic exit. It wasn't a final confrontation. It was just a simple act, the most difficult decision I had ever made, to walk away. I need to go, I said quietly. I'm done here. I don't have anything left to say. Abby didn't stop me. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't try to convince me to stay. She just sat there, broken, and I knew that whatever was left between us was already gone. I left that hotel room and walked away from everything I had known, everything I had loved. There was no going back. There was only moving forward, even if I didn't know where I was going. I didn't feel the anger I thought I would. When I left the hotel and returned home, I expected fury, a storm of emotions, something. Instead, I felt an eerie calm, as though the decision to leave had been made long before I had physically walked out of the door. When I arrived back at the house, I found Abby sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and drawn. She looked up when she heard the door open, her eyes wide, but she didn't speak. I wasn't sure if she was waiting for me to yell, to demand answers, but I wasn't sure what else there was to say. I'm here to talk about the future, I said softly, breaking the silence. Abby nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. She didn't seem to know how to react. There was no defiance in her, no excuses. I wasn't sure if that made things easier or harder. You've hurt me, Abby, I said, my voice cracking just slightly. But more than that, you've hurt our daughter. You've torn apart the foundation of everything we've built. And that's not something I can easily forget. I know, she whispered. I know I've ruined everything. I don't know how to fix it, but I swear I never meant to hurt you. I know, I replied. But intentions don't matter when the damage is done. You can't erase what you did, and neither can I. We sat there for a while, the weight of our lives pressing down on us. Abby was crying softly, and I wasn't sure if she was crying for herself, for us, or for the life we had once shared. It was hard to separate the woman I had married from the woman who had betrayed me. I don't want revenge, Abby, I said finally. I don't want to drag this out and make it uglier than it already is. I just want to move on. Abby nodded, wiping her tears. I don't blame you. You deserve better than this. I'm so sorry. For a moment, there was nothing left to say. I didn't have the energy to fight. We both knew this marriage was over, that we couldn't keep pretending it was something it wasn't. I signed the divorce papers a few days later. Everything was divided, and as much as it hurt, I felt a sense of relief. I had done what needed to be done, and now I could start to heal. I stayed in Texas after everything. The peace and quiet were what I needed. No more bustling meetings, no more pretending to be happy for the sake of appearances. I found work on a small ranch, learning how to care for plants, animals, simple, meaningful work that didn't require me to be anyone other than who I was. It wasn't about running from the past. It was about rebuilding something real, something I could control. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping, not the sound of an argument, not the quiet desperation that had consumed my home. Every day felt like a fresh start. Months passed before I met Joan, a local veterinarian. At first, it was casual conversations, getting to know one another, talking about life in Texas and the weather mostly. I was cautious, hesitant to dive into anything, but Joan's easygoing nature made it easy to talk. There was no pressure, no expectations. She didn't ask about my past, and that was exactly what I needed. The divorce was finalized quickly after that. The legal battles were nothing more than paperwork, and in the end, Abby and I went our separate ways without a fight. It felt like the weight of the world had been lifted from my shoulders. The day I signed the papers, I realized I wasn't running anymore. I had found a place where I could breathe, where I could start fresh. But there were still moments of reflection. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about Abby and the life we once had. The good memories were still there, but they were fading, like old photographs losing their color. It wasn't that I didn't care anymore, but I understood now that the love I thought we had was built on something fragile. I couldn't live in the past. I had to move forward. Our daughter came to visit a few months later, and I walked her down the aisle at her wedding. The emotions I felt in that moment were overwhelming: pride, sadness, joy. I couldn't hold back the tears when she took my arm, and as I gave her away, I realized that I wasn't the same person I had been when I first walked down the aisle with Abby. Later, at the reception, I saw Joan standing at a distance, watching me. Our eyes met, and I walked over to her. I took her hand in mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was truly grounded. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing something new, something I could call my own. The past was behind me now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. I didn't need to destroy what was left of my marriage with Abby. I didn't need to fight her or myself anymore. I just needed to build something new, something truly mine.